Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Addictions, Abuses, and Recovery. My name is Sherry Irvin, and I will be your host today. With me, I have my very good friend, Maria Sontag. Maria is a woman in long term recovery. She is a peer recovery specialist at Recovery is Happening, and me and her are going to sit down and we're going to talk about her experience, strength, and hope. What I love about Maria is not only is she a woman in long term recovery, but she also does chairs meetings, and she talks about the Native American way of Wellbriety and how Native Americans can keep their sobriety and keep their culture. So without further ado, let's talk some recovery. It is my pleasure to introduce to you my really good friend, Maria Sontag.
Anine, bonjour. I'm a woman in long-term recovery, and my name is Maria. I am currently, I am from Saugeen First Nation, which happens to be Anishinaabe. It's about 2 hours north of Winnipeg. My mother, my grandmother had 16 children, and the oldest 8 were put in residential schools. They were taken away. It was kind of like forced. It wasn't a choice. Um, they so the religion was taken away. That family, that close knit family, was taken away from them, and they were introduced to everything that they had learned their whole life was now removed from them and told from them that it wasn't okay. So their language wasn't okay, their religious practices weren't okay, their ceremonies weren't okay, and then they were introduced to religion and different history books, and there was a lot more violence. There was a lot more um, not really incredibly appropriate things to do to young kids. So then, as my parents get older, they also so you learn what it's like a lot of times you hear, like, if you're an abused child, you may become an abuser. Um, so they learned a lot of not okay things when they were in those homes. Like, self-esteem was low, everything was not the opposite of nurturing and love. And so those are the things that they gave, to their children as well. So when my mother was pregnant, um, I also had an auntie that was pregnant at the same time, because again, my grandmother had 16 kids. I have aunts and uncles that are younger than I am. Um, so I have one aunt that's about 30 days older than I am. So when I was born, it was a lot of people in a tiny house. And back then, they still lived in a pretty much one room shack, as it were. And then somehow or another, and I'm not exactly clear about exactly what happened here, but because of the large number of people that were living in the house, there was something that they practiced also in the 60s, which was called the 60s scoop. And what they did is they took indigenous children and they, for lack of a better word, assimilated them and put them into white families to be adopted. However, before that happened, it meant that I had to go somewhere. So I was put in orphanages, I was put in foster homes. So my life as a small child in those formative years, which is what we carry for the rest of our lives, are those formative years, were that of non-nurturing, abandonment, betrayal, not being touched, abuse. So I was an alcoholic addict waiting to happen. I just needed the right formula. So then I get adopted at age 5 into a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful home in Minnesota, and I'm adopted into this wonderful, amazing family, healthy family, and I'm not. I'm not. And so I bring that trauma with me, and they weren't ready for it, because in the 60s, post-traumatic stress wasn't a thing yet, especially for young kids. I mean, yes, it was for Vietnam vets or any of that war, but not for little kids. Like, that wasn't acknowledged at the time. So I know today that my parents did everything that they could. But anyway, so we go fast forward. I've been to treatment about 22 times. jails, institutions. However, I really get excited about talking about my recovery, because the reason that I'm clean and sober today, and my recovery date is 1/27/2011. It only took me 42 years to get double digits. The first time I was ever in treatment was about 1979. I've not been clean and sober that long. But what happened and what I did differently, absolutely, fully and completely differently, is I embraced a higher power. I never knew what that was. I absolutely had no idea what that was. I would meet people, they would talk about going to church, they would talk about this. And I was like, man, what is that? What is that? And so I knew, because at the time I was living in a tent. I was homeless, I was unemployable. I was estranged from my family, my adopted family. They hadn't spoken to me for probably about 10 years. Nobody, I had burned every bridge possible. And my pattern at that time is I would go to a meeting, and then after the meeting I would go to the liquor store, and then I would go back to my tent. Repeat. And so when I'm into one of the meetings, I think it was like one of the steps in the talks about finding a higher power of your understanding. And I remember asking questions. I remember looking in these group of people, and there were people that absolutely, fully and completely resonated with me. Like, their words matched their actions. Their words matched their actions inside that room for an hour and outside of the room, like for the whole 24 hours. And I didn't see that a lot. Like, there was like this absolute follow through. And I was like, how do you do that? What is that? I want me some of that. And then somebody had suggested praying. It's like, what is that? Right? And they said, well, find a prayer. And at that time I had realized and recognized that I really, really needed to acknowledge my indigenousness, that I needed to acknowledge and embrace that I am an Indigenous woman, that I am a woman in long-term recovery, Indigenous woman, and to acknowledge that piece of me, because I had never acknowledged that piece. I remember at times there was parts of my using where I'd walk down Franklin Avenue in Minneapolis, and I would see these bloated, red-faced natives, and I would promise myself that that would never be me until it became me, and that was me. So then somebody had suggested I pray, and they said, just find a prayer that resonates with you. And I happened to find the Indian version of the 23rd Psalm, and it was, I'll share it with you sometime in the future, but it's pretty long, it's gorgeous, it's beautiful. And they said, and you got to get down on your hands and knees. Well, again, I'm homeless, so it doesn't, where am I going to get down on my hands and knees? And water is incredibly healing for me. So I got this piece of paper, and me, in dramatic fashion, being the good addict alcoholic that I am, I got my sage, I got my little seashell, I got sweet grass, I got a feather, and matches, and I'm all ready to do something I've never done before. And I get on my knees, and I also was told to put tobacco in my left hand, because that's the closest to my heart. And I start talking to the Great Spirit. I start talking to my Creator. I have no idea what I'm doing. And then I get on my knees and I start reading this prayer. And for the first time in my life, I think I was crying the tears of my ancestors. They were hot. They were about this big. And it felt good. It was like this release of maybe ancestral relief, because it takes one person to change the pattern. It takes one person to heal, and it can take one person to heal a nation and to begin that healing process. And so, being the good addict and alcoholic that I am, if it feels good, I'm going to do it again. And so as I'm burning, I'm smudging myself, and in the area that I was doing this with, it happened to be on the shores of the Mississippi. It's just absolutely beautiful. And the area that I was in, there's just eagles all over the place. And so each time I would see an eagle fly by, because my parents I was estranged, I would, my adopted parents, and I would, every time I would see the eagle, I'd say, please tell my mom and dad that I love them. And perhaps someday they can meet this version of me, because they had never met that version of me. And I had actually lost the privilege to be a daughter because of my addiction of 20, treatment 22 years. I promised this is the one time. I promise I got it this time. I promise. I had lost the privilege to also say I'm sorry. I had lost the privilege to be a sister. I had lost the privilege to be employed. I just had lost the privilege to exist in society.
Yeah, I think the one thing that us as family, with our families, we don't realize just how much collateral damage that we're leaving behind. It is definitely not an I, it is a we. It affects the whole family dynamics. And you're absolutely right, even in mine. They have heard, I'm sorry. They've heard, I'm never going to do it again. Only for me to do it again. So they don't want to hear the bullshit response that, you know what, yep, I'm never going to do it again. So you're right. We lose our families.
Um, so that so being the good addict and alcoholic I am, I started praying more. So they said, at least do it twice a day. So I did it more because it felt good. And then I started to realize that some of my behavior started changing. I started losing my sarcasm. I actually started to become kind. I was no longer a scrapper, angry person. Granted, it didn't happen overnight. But all of a sudden I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't yell at them. What's up? And so it just got easier and easier. Like this new individual started to materialize. So when I talk about my recovery today, I have to say that I don't know all the things that I do. I don't know what's keeping me clean and sober. And so I'm not willing to let go of any of it. So that means that, yes, I have to go to meetings. Yes, I have to have a sponsor. Yes, I have to pray. Yes, I have to continue to practice the steps. Yes, I have to go to work. Yes, I have to, all these things. Because if I remove one of those, how do I know that that's not the one thing that's keeping me clean and sober? So with that said, as I continued to walk the path of an Indigenous woman in recovery, I began to feel more peace, more like my ancestors were walking with me, like my ancestors were talking to me. This and today now when I do things like 7 generations ahead and healing the 7 generations behind. So I'm as mindful as possible. One of the things that's really cool that I practice today in my recovery is, so for me, my disease of addiction was always perception. And, there's one of the things that we talk about in Wellbriety is practicing like the eagle's view of point. And so like, if just in my humanness, what I see is what is in front of me, and that's all I see. But an eagle is up flying high and gets to see all the whole perspective, everything, a 360, below, behind, under, above. And so I practice that because I'm so used to just being selfish and self-centered and only see my viewpoint. And so when I get to look at the whole room and know that 50 people in a room have 50 different viewpoints, and I get to respect and honor each one. Doesn't mean I have to agree with them.
Exactly.
So, and then a couple of years ago, a couple, who I was in a meeting with came up to me and introduced themselves to me, and they happened to be from a local reservation in the area of southeastern Minnesota. And they gifted me, and respectfully, I'm not going to leave their name out because they preferred to be anonymous, but they gifted me with a class, and that was Wellbriety training, the 12 steps Wellbriety for men and women. And it happened to be during the beginning of the pandemic, so I wasn't able to do it in person, but grateful nonetheless. And then I did a couple of Wellbriety meetings in the location I was at, but today, just recently, the place that I'm employed at gifted me with the opportunity to start Wellbriety meeting, and we've been doing it now for about 7-8 weeks, and I'm amazed at how big it is. Like when I thought I would be excited, I thought a perfect number for me would be to have 7 to 8 people, and it's far succeeded that. And yeah, so it's an opportunity to teach, to share indigenousness. I mean, the whole bottom line about Wellbriety is healing, generational healing, individual healing, trauma healing, what we call a healing forest, and creating a healing forest. Yeah, so I'm excited about it, and
I'm excited for you. Just a little bit of a side note, as many of you know or who do know me, and for the audience as well, I did a 23andMe ancestry kit 2 years ago, and I was raised to believe that I was Mexican and Italian, and I was fully accepting of that. And my best friend happened to open up my test results for me, and he's like, "Okay, Sherry, you're gonna be a little bit shocked." And I'm like, "What?" And he's like, "You were 49% Native American." And I and I've always felt that native pull, and I didn't know why. And now I do. I believe in the Creator. I've never been really comfortable in a church, even though I grew up with the Judeo-Christian, going to a church, going to Sunday school. I just never felt comfortable in it. And the me today that practices my religious belief today, I believe in the Creator. I believe in the animals. I believe in being outdoors. I also believe that I don't need to be in a church to have my belief. And what was really hard for me, and it can't be helped now, is that I don't, here I am, I'm 53 years old, and I'm finding out that this is indeed my culture, and I know nothing about it. So, learning from you, I'm very excited about this Wellbriety thing. I'm hoping to make it work with my new work schedule so that I can attend these, so I can give myself some knowledge and some education. So I'm super excited about this. So once again, thank you for sharing this, and sharing this with people that are recovering. We all recover differently. We all have different nationalities. We all have different beliefs. We all have these things. So I am just beyond excited.
well, and the gentleman who started Wellbriety, I mean, his foundation is another 12-step program. Um, and the only thing that he says that he would change about, this other 12 steps program is that he would do them in a circle. So like the steps would be just continuous and that we don't stop. Which, I mean, I don't know that everybody stops doing them anyway, but yeah, so it's been fun. I am in contact with my blood relation father, and he calls me, a few days a week and shares with me word of the day, in Anishinaabe or Ojibwe. And I would love to tell you that I remember what he says and how to say it and how to pronounce it, but I still have the accent of a woman that was brought up in a white German household, but that's okay. And so I am in contact with my reserve in Canada. They call them reserves. In the United States, they call them reservations. However, at one time there were no borders. There wasn't the border between the United States and Canada, and there wasn't the border between Mexico and the United States. And we were all one, and that includes all of Mexico. So,
And
yeah.
I am definitely looking forward to doing some research into my lineage, and I want to be able to honor that, because I do feel that a piece is lost. I got to go to Pine Ridge. I told you this. Got to spend a lot of time there, and I just felt a sense of home. I just felt like I had come home, and I want to be able to learn so much more about my history, and then, not saying that I'll be completely complete, but I'll have a sense of belonging to somewhere.
Right. And I think, and that was a huge piece too. And what's really cool is, so I had shared with you that I had been estranged from my adopted family, but my adopted mother, on her 90th, before her 90th birthday, had invited me to her 90th birthday party, and which is what the reason why I moved back to Minnesota. I happened to be living in Florida, but during that last year and a half with her, I she asked me all these questions. She asked me about um, my identity. She asked me the things that I had found out. She asked me everything that she could know, and it was beautiful to have that part to share with her because she didn't know. And back then, they weren't. It was pretty much that we just weren't talked about. It wasn't talked about. I mean, even in the schools, they were taught. There really wasn't any Native history in school except that we got killed, and that we weren't. So I truly believe that even though change is slow, it is beginning. And I do choose to stay in love and forgiveness. My recovery can't afford to have resentments or bitterness towards all of that. But I do know that the reason that I can claim double digits in recovery today is acknowledging the spirituality part of being an Anishinaabe woman, and acknowledging and holding my head up high and knowing that I am not just an indigenous woman, I am a sober indigenous woman. And to be able to share that in hopefully I can stay humble, because if I can't stay humble, I will be humbled.
We are not all, we like to think that we're unique, but we find out very quickly within the walls that we are nothing special. I've had to learn those lessons as well, that the creator has to make me just that small. And I know that for myself, I have to live in the 24 hours. I am no more, no less. I cannot, I know that I am still that one drink away from losing everything. So I really need to stay diligent to a program.
I I don't know. The place that I'm working at has gifted me with the ability to have that meeting there and do. I don't know, and I it's a really fun. It's just fun to find out where people are from, and the indigenous of other countries as well. Indigenous people in Russia, indigenous people in Australia, are all everybody's welcome. It doesn't matter what color, what race, what size, what accent. Just a sidebar about accents. One of my on my bucket list is to go to a meeting in every single state, simply because I love accents. And I spent time in the South, and sometimes when I go back to Florida, I take the long way so I can go through Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, just to go to a meeting and listen to the accents, because half the time I'm like, what did you say? What? So I'm a tourist.
I know.
A 12-step tourist.
I got to spend some time in New York, and I kind of have
and those
that
great accents too.
And I actually kind of fit pretty well. I have that typical New York type thing. So I actually love New York. But yeah, no, that's awesome. I love that. That's a great goal. That is awesome. And that's so nice too. And I do, anytime I go somewhere, I try to hit, if I go somewhere different, even when I go out of the country, I do try to find an AA meeting. For me, that's my spiritual step program, and now I'm wanting to embrace this Wellbriety to figure out stuff. But I do know that when I do go out of the country, it's kind of nice to, the places that I usually go, and the last place we went was the Dominic, and we were at a resort, and there was lots of drinking, and so it was kind of nice to be able to find a step program there. Like, okay, yep, you're good, because you never know. I mean, you could be anywhere, and it just kind of can overtake you. So I, even going to with spring break, and it brings triggers, those triggers come back. So I know that I need to find a meeting wherever I go. So that is like exciting. What a cool goal. I love that.
And maybe when I get, when I become rich and famous or something, I'll go. The next one would be every country. However,
Yep.
I'll be satisfied with the states. There's this really cool thing on Thanksgiving Day. They have a sunrise ceremony on Alcatraz, and all the indigenous people on Thanksgiving morning do like a celebration and a ceremony, and that's on my bucket list as well.
That would be wonderful.
Sunrise ceremony. Excuse me.
I actually lived in California, so I actually got to tour Alcatraz, and that is an amazing place in itself. Let
Yeah.
me tell you.
Yeah.
Holy cow!
Yeah.
So that is exciting. So, and I think what's really exciting too is what kind of sets you apart a little bit too. That would be probably most helpful with being that peer recovery specialist is that you do specialize. Uh, they'll be more comfortable coming to you because you understand the cultures, you understand. I think that's amazing. There's not very many that do the Native American way, and I love that. And they're more comfortable. I would be more comfortable talking to somebody that understands my culture and understands my spiritual belief because I have a spiritual program.
Well, and no disrespect to any other cultures. However, there's a little more different kind of trauma, as it were, as in historical trauma. There weren't a lot of, I mean, there's just, it's not that, trauma is trauma, but it's just different circumstances.
Yeah, being forced to lose your language, being forced to cut
The land
your hair,
being taken
the
away.
land being taken away. Absolutely.
So to be in a room of people that understand that part, with no judgment, with no anything, is also healing. And then we find our voice to be,
Yes.
to find forgiveness and to, because before we were ever allowed back in the day, if we were sick, and before we were ever allowed back into the tribe or to come be a part of that, there was all these healing ceremonies that would happen before.
Yep.
And we've lost that. Like when people get out of prison, we're not doing a healing ceremony for them. Or, if I get drunk or anything happens, that healing ceremony, like there's culture, there's traditions that have been lost that we're slowly wanting to bring back. There's a healing ceremony I want to do with individuals if and when they relapse or something happens to them, and it's called the wiping away of the tears. And there so happens to be a place in Rochester called, I believe it's called Indian Hills Park.
Wonderful.
Okay. And that used to be a place that I think it's the highest point in Rochester, and I believe at one time that they actually did vision quests there.
Oh,
and because they could see obviously all of Rochester before there was all the buildings and everything. And
I know I was completely blessed, and I was able to go to a ceremony, and I was able to go to a couple of sweat lodges, and it's just beautiful. First of all, I was amazed that I got through the sweat because I was like, whoo, to be able to go through all those doors. I was like, wow, I actually was able to go through that, and the ceremony itself is just so beautiful and so cathartic. It's fantastic. So yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, and so I mean, it's just a very humble ceremony, but it's just more calling on our ancestors. So hopefully, the goal would be to go up on Indian Hills Park and call on the ancestors, basically, to heal us.
So how did you get your call to be a peer recovery specialist?
Well, there's an individual that worked at Recovery's Happening, and I happened to know her well. And she kept on encouraging me to become a peer recovery support specialist. And I was in Florida.
She's amazing.
And I was in Florida, and I would be like, no, because I truly believed that I still didn't have anything to give, because I had been out there for so long, for so many years, and I'd been to treatment so many times, and what do I have? But then the more that I started healing, and healing and healing, and not being triggered by my past, where I could talk about my past without it, taking me out, I realized that, well, maybe I'll try this because I can do something. It's only a, short class, and see if it's a good fit for me or not. And so far, I still make mistakes. Wouldn't say I'm perfect,
None
but
of
you
us
get
are.
to, and basically all it is sharing my experience, strength, and hope again and again. And, you know, I think the big piece for me is that healing from a lot of the trauma makes me a better um, peer than if I hadn't healed from that stuff.
I think you have to have that. You have to have that empathy. You have to be able to go into it with no judgment. For the longest time, for myself, and I always say this on every podcast I do, I created this podcast to talk about things that are not talkable. I am a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. I am a survivor of a major eating disorders. I'm also a woman in long term recovery from alcoholism. However, I do know that, especially with my alcoholism, that this is a progressive disease. It is insidious and it is waiting. And I think that being able to talk about these things are huge. They happen. There are truth. There are journeys. Are we perfect in our journey? No, we're not. But the best that we can do is just to be the best person that we can be. And like I tell my sponsees, I want you to succeed. We're not always perfect at it. But you know what? You keep coming back. We don't shoot our wounded. I love that. So, it is so great what you're doing. You know, just having that person to talk to.
I think it's a we. I'm a part of a team. It's not everything I do. I've learned from somebody else.
Our mentors.
And I've been gifted with a lot of mercy and grace throughout my life. So,
where do you see yourself moving in the future?
Well, I did live in Florida, and I did like the warm weather. However, I don't know that I ever adjusted to the humidity in Florida, but there's times where, somewhere else might be a little interesting. And I don't know what that means. I mean, that could be maybe I want to go live in Canada and visit my indigenous family for a while. Or, Arizona sounds appealing to me. Colorado sounds appealing. We'll just see where the creator takes me. I leave it to the creator.
That's all we can do.
However, I can say for the first time in my life, I actually think it's time for me to live in one place for more than a year. Oh.
Yeah, so
I'll see what that feels like.
But you know what? There are those people that have that wanderlust, that bohemian.
I know.
Get out and see the world. I think that's amazing too. I mean, yeah, I can see where you could just thrive doing that. How exciting, the very idea of going to a different meeting in every state. That is like awesome. I love that. That is, I mean, talk about a goal. That is incredible. I absolutely just love that.
And it's fun to go from, the other part was small town and then big city. Small town, big city. So I need to clarify that is maybe go to 2 meetings in a state, one in a small town and then one in a bigger city, because again, that's all different.
So if one of my last few questions that I have for you is, what advice would you give to, somebody that's coming into the program that isn't indigenous, and how would, what would you say to them, or any of your sponsees, or, what advice would you give that person coming newly into the program?
Well, I don't know that I would give advice. However, I would give
suggestions.
A big, huge suggestion. Yes. And I would say, hang on tight. It's going to be a bumpy ride.
May West. Absolutely. Well, I cannot thank you enough for being here and sharing that experience, strength, and hope. We could talk hours. However, we don't have that long. But I do appreciate you taking the time with me to share everything that
Thank
you know.
Thank you for inviting me. Wow, woo!
We made it through.
I know.
Right? And that's what I love about this is that that's what I love about doing these podcasts is that they're just 2 friends sitting down and talking, and I love that, and I love what you do, and I'm so appreciative of recoveries happening.
I love what you do.
Oh, thank you. Having peer recovery specialists do this and being able to go into the hospital and you have that brief moment of time to say, hey, are you done yet? I'll be here. I'll be here to guide you through your moment. And so often sometimes it takes, sometimes it doesn't. Every person has their own journey. But the beauty of it is that, you're out there to help them. You're being of service to them. So I appreciate that. And the world needs to have more people like you.
Like
And,
us.
well, yeah, like us. You're right,
All right.
like us. So thank you so much again for being here.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful day, everybody. Thank you so much
Woo-hoo!
for watching. Bye bye.